right, and I think we are live.
All right.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. Everybody, I'm here with the one and only Treellama. Thank you so much, dude. I know I just said that. I just said that as we were getting it set up, but I'm grateful for you coming on
Oh,
and doing this with me.
no worries. The 30 hours, huh?
30
Enjoy.
hours. 30 hours. That's the plan. Yeah, so we'll
Okay.
see. It's a I mean, maybe you could say it's a marathon.
It could be. That would be 26.2 hours.
I know.
If you
I
make it that far, then the rest is just gravy.
exactly. So, Tree Llama, everybody. I mean, you can tell me maybe if my description here is poor, doesn't count everything in. But you are a software developer. You've developed a ton of like free software, helped to develop a bunch of marathon based stuff. Aleph One, WeLand, Visual Mode, Atik, Aorta, and Shape Fusion, I believe, are the ones that you have listed on your Patreon.
Yeah,
And
I'm a
obviously, all kind
contributor
of
to
you contributor.
contributor to some of those, and the author of Wayland and Atquay.
That is so awesome. How did you? I guess. How did you get started? You were a software developer. Were you a fan of Marathon before that? Is this something that you kind of found and then became a part of, or were you a fan for a long time?
Yeah, I was. I played a lot of Marathon in college, actually.
Okay.
Mostly net games, believe it or not. But I did play through the second two games in college. My first exposure to Marathon was actually the demo that came on a zip disk with my old Centris 650.
Wow. What year was that?
And that was 1990. Well, I guess it would have been 1995 because the game came out in 94, like right at the end of 94. So it would have been 1995. And so I played that on my Centris, but I never got super far in it because at the time I didn't know there was a run key, and you need a run key to get past part of blaspheme quarantine.
Yeah.
So I never really got into the original Marathon that much, because then when I did start playing in college, I had to learn to use the mouse, because otherwise you were just toast in net games.
Yeah.
And Marathon's mouse control is real bad. So like the first time I officially played the original Marathon was in 2012 or so, when we got the data files working natively in Aleph One.
Wow. That is so wild. And originally there was no mouse control, right? It was all keyboard, or did it come with mouse control with the first one? Was
The
that always
original
an option?
Marathon, it had mouse control, but it was like really bad. So
Okay.
there were bugs with the first couple versions. There were bugs that they fixed, and then it had the bug where if you look down, you would just stop dead in your tracks, which makes it really hard to control with the mouse.
So you couldn't take advantage of that newly minted vertical aim that was kind of the hot thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it? I guess, so obviously this is a 30th anniversary. Does that feel kind of surreal to you? I guess having these kind of net game experiences at this kind of, I don't know, pivotal gaming stage of your life.
Yeah, it does feel kind of surreal to me. I mean, I think it's really nice that video games are getting into this. I mean, they can actually become classics. We
Yeah.
had some 80s video games, but the ones that I grew up with were the 90s games, and those are now really getting into the era where they're like just classics. And so yeah, 30 years. That's something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Do those kind of net game memories stand out to you as kind of a core experience, or was that later on, or were those still
So
kind of too primitive?
that would have been in the late 90s, like 1998 or so. I started playing on campus in like the computer lab. They would do LAN games in the computer lab.
That's awesome.
And then maybe my sophomore year, I could play from my apartment, because it was one of the apartments that had Ethernet into the main campus of the college. That was pretty rare in 1997 to have Ethernet and a link to the internet. So we had that, and then in '98, my roommates both had Macs, and that was just. It was a really bad idea. I don't know how we passed any courses that semester, because it was just constant. Like, you'd be trying to do your homework, and one of the other guys would just start up Marathon Infinity and leave it on the home screen, and so that the music would keep running.
Yeah.
And then the second guy would do that, and it basically would just continue until you gave in and played net games.
And then all
we
you
played
play.
so many net games that year. Yeah. So
Wow.
that was a good memory. I got more into the solo play as I started to work on all of one, and the solo games are also classics themselves. They are really
Yeah.
they're deep and just unlike anything in first person shooters, especially at the time.
Is that
But
something
it's
that like you were there like in that moment? Is that something that you guys were all kind of aware of? Did it stand out, or was that something that kind of that understanding kind of evolved over time when people were on the story page and kind of diving deep into the lore for an extended period, or was that kind of evident in that moment?
well, I wasn't on the internet very much when
Hmm.
so I would have been maybe 16 when the game came out. So I wasn't in with the first group of Vault Games Marathon players and the beginning of the story page and all that.
Yeah.
So I didn't have kind of that realization of where Marathon was historically the instant it came out. But I did, as I went to college and started playing games, and you play Doom or you play Quake, and there's nothing other than running around and shooting things.
Yeah.
And so Marathon always stood out for that reason to me. And as time went on, games started to get some of that stuff added to them. And now
Yeah.
it would be difficult, I think, to make a first person shooter that didn't have some story element to it. But I don't know that I realized it at the time. It was probably a realization later into the 90s. And then, especially as I started working on the engine and got to know the games like really in depth.
Hmm. And how did so? I guess in between this period where you're playing in college, and then kind of what is it? Maybe like early 2010s period when you started doing the Aleph One stuff. Is that accurate?
It was, I think, my first submission was by patches in 2003.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there's some changes of mine in there going back 20 years now.
Wow. And wait, is that
But
the origin of the Aleph One project, or was that something separate? Or
no, I'm just one of the latest developers on it. It started
hmm.
in the late 90s, early
Okay.
2000s when Bungie released the source code for Marathon 2.
Oh, okay. I didn't
Uh,
realize that they had released it that kind of early on. I thought it was later in the
yeah, they
2000s.
did. It was right before the Microsoft sale. They got
Oh,
Marathon
okay.
out there as open source, maybe to assuage the community or maybe to thank the community. Maybe it's a little of both.
Yeah.
But they got that out there, and the original Aleph One developers, Lauren Petrich, Christian Siebix, I'm not going to be able to name all of them, but
Hmm.
there were probably, I would say, 6 to 8 people working on it at the very beginning, just getting it to compile
Hmm.
for the Mac, because the source code that Bungie released in I'm just going to say 2000 because it's easiest, because it
Hmm.
was either like the very end of 1999 or the beginning of 2000. But the source code that they released back then didn't have all the files in it,
Oh
because
wow.
there was stuff that they were still using in games and they didn't want to release it along with Marathon 2. So those original developers had to figure out a lot of that stuff and re-implement it themselves. And they got it working. So in 2000, you could download builds of All of One, and you gradually got support for things like OpenGL and things like that really early on.
Wow. So that's kind of that's just amazing to me that it was such a kind of long road to walk with these kind of incremental updates. What was the kind of first moment for you where you got involved with that? Were you developing games or working on software development for games?
I I did. I graduated college with a degree in music composition and computer science, and I
Oh
went
wow.
into software engineering as a field because it pays a little better than music composition. But
Okay.
at that time, so I think it was when I started submitting those patches, what had happened was I heard from some other players, some other marathon players at the university that I went to, that they were going to do some LAN, and so I came in like as a guest just to play with them because I had been an old school player,
Hmm.
and we were playing, and we decided to use all of one, and there were things that weren't quite right. So like um, we would play tag, and uh, I was used to playing in Marathon Infinity, and of course, Aleph One is based off of Marathon Two.
Hmm.
One of the changes between Marathon 2 and Marathon Infinity is that if you suicide in a tag game in Marathon Infinity, you become it.
Mm.
But in Marathon 2, you don't. And so I noticed these little changes and stuff. So I you know, I I knew how to write software, so I got the code and I was looking at it and I figured out these little changes to make and sent some patches in. And as I was doing that, I got to know one of the developers working on the net code at the time was Woody Zenfeld, and at the time we would also join on the AIM Marathon channel. Forget what it was called, but it was AOL Instant Messenger had a channel where we would gather to organize games
Okay.
because he had gotten some internet support working. It wasn't great. In fact, I think the first net game of Marathon over the internet was like, I don't know, 6 frames per second on a game of Thunderdome or something like that. But he had been working on that, and he worked on the client server model, which is kind of what you need to work on the internet. And when he got that working, and then a little bit of latency hiding, then you could actually start playing games, marathon games on the internet, which was like a dream. And through the course of that, I was also following the updates and contributing here and there. And so I gradually started contributing to the project, and they ended up giving me commit access.
Wow.
So that's kind of how I got into it. Yeah, that was a long time ago. And so it's been, like you said, a long road since then.
It kind of all stems from you going, oh, wait, hold on. I just wanted to play this mode right, you know?
Right, yes. Yeah, there's a couple things here like, hey, why are there aliens on this map? There aren't supposed to be aliens. That's another difference between Marathon 2 and Infinity. The aliens checkbox doesn't work in Marathon 2. So those little fixes went in and got back to kind of brought back the experience that I had of playing Infinity in university.
That's so awesome. Is there any kind of like, I guess, key moments that stand out for you, like in the development? Were there any like big leaps or moments where it kind of, where it's kind of like a huge jump in terms of what you guys are trying to get into the game?
Those early net games, I don't know if I still have the film of the very first star topology. This is what Woody called it. It's kind of a client server, but it still passes inputs around, so it isn't really a client server. But that first star topology game that we played in Thunderdome, it was like 6 frames per second, and then a few months later, when he got latency hiding working, and he called it, I think he called that WonderNat. And we played that game, and it was like suddenly not laggy at all to play on on a good network connection. It'll still lag if you're on a bad connection, even to this day. But those were kind of standouts. And then around the 2010, 2011 era, we had gotten the game working pretty well and pretty stable. It stopped crashing. It wasn't leaking memory anymore. And we thought, you know what? It's about time for a 1.0 release finally. Just right about that time, we were contacted by Bungie because they wanted us to work on a few things to collaboration with them. And so we delayed that like 1.0 release for like a year and a half while we worked on making the game a little friendlier to users and working on a few features and even some integration with Bungie.net that never ended up making it to seeing the light of day. But that was another big one when we had our 1.0 release in 2011. And then in the process of doing that, we had taken before that, to play Marathon 1 on Aleph 1, you had to use a port called M1A1 that some fans had done in the early 2000s. And they took some liberties with it. Like, I don't know if you know much about M1A1, but it starts you out in a room that looks like the Pathways into Darkness pyramid, right? Because it's one of the fan theories is that the two games are set in the same universe. And some things like that. And to do our 1.0 release, we got permission from Bungie to go back and try to make that more authentic. So we took that out, and we would check out. It was me, and it was one of the Freeverse developers, and it was Hamish, the
Yeah. From the story page.
The original, the original Marathon fan,
Yeah.
Hamish Sinclair. And so we worked on making that Marathon experience more authentic. And it was during the process of that I realized, like, we would go through and look at where the monsters were and where these triggers were and where this was and where that was. And it was during that process that I realized just how much design intent went into that original Marathon. I mean, considering that they had, they had never developed a first person shooter like this before, it was impressive, the amount of intentionality and like encounters and things like that just felt kind of haphazard to me in M1A1. So when we went through and do that, it kind of inspired me to go and see, look, hey, can we take the original files and get that working? And so that's what I worked on, and another developer, Hopper, worked on the original Marathon file support. So that happened in a 1.1 release. And so that was another big moment.
And was did Bungie give you guys?
The really big moment was sorry, go ahead.
Did Bungie give you guys like additional, when you were going from that 1.0 to 1.1? Did you guys coordinate with Bungie? Like, did they give you additional stuff, or this all just based off you reverse engineering?
Yeah, at that point, the 1.0 release happened because they had a game they had to crunch on, and they were switching gears. And so some of the things that we had been working on with them, they didn't have the resources to see to the finish. So we got that 1.0 release out, and then we were kind of back on our own again. Wow. Which happens because, we've got these two different worlds where you've got a group of volunteers working on a really old game, just volunteering their time and not making any money on it. Mm-hmm. And then Bungie has to spend their time working on things that keep the business going.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we'll get a little ambitious, and when that happens, you just don't see anything. And sometimes they'll get a little ambitious, and when that happens, it doesn't come out. So, but it's kind of weird being in a world where we're working on this free software volunteer game that the IP is owned by this colossal game studio.
Yeah. Especially now, how they've kind of ascended to megacorp status.
Yes, they're even more so than, I guess 2011 would have been the very beginning of Destiny 2, right? So they weren't even they were only mega corporate back then. They weren't mega corporate like they are now post Destiny.
Did you guys, in terms of because kind of the two things that stick out in my mind were, like, I feel like a lot of people may have had the opportunity to be introduced. There was like the Marathon 2, when Dirdal came to XBLA, the Xbox Live Arcade, and then the iOS stuff. Were you guys involved with that, or were you just aware that it was occurring?
We were not involved in the Freeverse game.
Mm-hmm. But did they communicate with you guys?
That happened. No, actually, not really. They so they couldn't, because they didn't intend to make the code-free software. They couldn't use any of All of One in the actual release, so they wrote their own engine for that.
Okay.
And I think they went through. It was, so the people that worked on that, one of them, it's Hippie Man from Freeverse, and he's an old Marathon fan. And another's Have Blue, who also has, I think, contributed to All of One. I don't remember, but he's the one who wrote the engine for the Freeverse game. So it was like community adjacent, but we weren't the developers who were working on All of One at the time were not, in communication with them or coordination with them.
Okay.
They did just a fantastic job in porting that game. It's got all new artwork. It's got very professional translations. It's got like a pro networking layer. You can actually play that thing on the network, even under pretty not great conditions, and it holds up great. So it was really cool what they did with that game.
Yeah. Is the iOS release, was that related to ALF1, or that came from ALF1?
Yeah, it is. It's a mobile port of the ALF1 engine. And the current maintainer of that works with us on stuff and contributes stuff back to the main engine too. And we're trying to make it so that it's easier to keep changes in sync between the two the two branches, because there are a few things you have to do for iOS that would make it difficult for us to incorporate the changes into the main branch of all of one.
Mm-hmm.
But we're always looking for ways to kind of coordinate those so that any of the changes are easier to get into the iOS version.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people who said that was kind of their entry into the series, which, you know, makes you go, oh my god, that seems like so difficult, you know, to me. But then I just kind of think about, man, the kind of impact that you guys have had putting this together. I mean, just in terms of how many people have gotten to experience the game, I mean, it's been significantly, you know, enhanced by you guys' kind of continued work to keep bringing this to different platforms and places for people to play it.
Yeah, the iOS port is. I ended up being very pleased with that. The original versions of that were a little rough, and a little I don't know. I would say not like idiomatic marathon. Like the difficulty levels were renamed and some things like that. That if somebody's getting into marathon, maybe they won't notice. But then if they really start to dig in, then they'll notice. But over the course of time, that has gotten polished up, and the iOS game's in great shape now.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible to see how far it's come. Is there like a thing? Because you know, you talking about kind of the AIM, you know, days of things. It almost sounds kind of, you know, very similar to what we're seeing in the Discord. You know, people getting net games together and stuff. Has it been like a huge change, or have people always been this kind of passionate and engaged with the game? Does it feel to you like there's a lot of similarity between the community now and then, or have things completely changed?
I think so. It's just a different medium, right? It started out, I mean, before the AIM channel in net games, there was, like, at the very beginning, there was Usenet, alt.games.marathon, and then in the 2000s, we had the AIM channel for gathering games, and there was the web forums, the Marathon Story Forum, and then the forums with the P.
Oh yeah, the forums.
That's right. The
always
forums.
been clever.
I didn't say it. Yes. And then we got, it's at one point in the 2000s, then we added support for the Myth meta server. So we were actually on a Myth meta server for a while. So when you wanted to join a game lobby, you would join MariusNet.
Oh wow.
Which was a Myth meta server at the time, but they were nice enough to create a couple of rooms on there for Marathon.
Oh, that's cool. And that's while I'm assuming Myth multiplayer was like pretty active still at the time. Like
Myth multiplayer was still going, yeah.
Wow.
So that MariusNet was an alternate to BattleNet for Myth game gathering, and then after a while we ended up writing our own meta server that still uses the Myth meta server protocol, and so we ran that, and people would join that and use that to gather games and to chat and everything. And now Discord is just the latest. It's just the latest place that the community hangs out. So I'm eager to see what's next after Discord.
Yeah, the brain chips were in the metaverse. Whatever comes next.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm not eager to see that much, but
do you have like a rough calculation? Obviously, you're coming up on this extended period of playing Marathon. How many kills do you think you've gotten in Marathon? How many times have you been through this campaign, especially just as you're going through and working on it? Is it some ridiculous number?
Campaign? I don't know that I've played the solo campaign more than a half dozen times for the second two games, and I've probably only played actual Marathon maybe a couple times. So it's not that many. For net games, I couldn't even count how many net games I played. It's just, I mean, it was like 15 hours a week in 1998 or 1999 whenever we lived together. But seriously, it was like another class in college. It's in terms of credit hours. And then since then, it's just
literally total carnage. I mean, that I think is the definition.
It is total carnage. Yeah.
Do you still play? Do you still get on quite a bit, or do you most of the time you spend now is kind of developing?
Yeah, it's more development now. I wouldn't say I play quite a bit, but I don't know, maybe once a month or something I have time to join net games. I'm going to try to make some time to join tomorrow just for the anniversary.
Awesome. Hopefully I can get killed by you. It'd be an honor.
That would be that will be fun for whatever definition of fun you want to consider the
Yeah.
original Marathon net games and maps.
A little bit of a throwback. How big, I guess, because I feel like in terms of, I mean, I don't know numbers wide, but I feel like in terms of bringing it to like a larger spotlight, obviously the announcement of this new games received a lot of attention, and then this year, kind of throughout the whole year, you guys were building up and then doing the Steam releases. Was that kind of like
That's right.
was a big, that seems like such a big time. I remember, I was talking about it in videos and stuff. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Even just moving from Aleph 1, which I feel like is so accessible, to Steam, I feel like is even another step up in terms of people being able to have that visibility and see it, and then also, get in and play it. Was that a big deal for you guys?
Yeah, I think Steam is a big deal. Again, this is one of those things where we're free software, and now here we are on this closed source, big corporate game platform.
Yeah.
But that's something that we thought would be a good idea, and Bungie also thought would be a good idea. And so that, this kind of second stage of a little bit of collaboration, they're the ones that put the seed in our head. Like, I mean, they wanted to warn us about the new game coming out, and they're like, is there anything we can help with? Like, say you wanted to put it on Steam, and I could just sense the hint. Is there anything we can help with that? And that kind of put the seed in my head to get that rolling. And I think it's been a great decision, because I was surprised after we released it how many people popped up and said, oh, I can get my friend to play this now. They won't download a zip file, but they'll just click install on Steam. This is great. And I'm perpetually out of touch, I guess. It was just surprising to me how many people, were intimidated just by the idea of downloading a zip file. So now this just makes it that much easier to get into the game. It just, like, if you have a Steam Deck, it just works. You just install it and, it just works. So I think that's been pretty big for, like, bringing this game to, I don't know that it's about bringing it to a wider audience, but I think it's about letting people who would find this game be appealing get it, Yeah. I don't think it's ever going to have mass appeal, but I think the more people who are aware that they could try it out, they'll try it out. And if it's not for them, they'll move on. But if it's for them, then, that's suddenly a way for them to experience the game.
Man. And to think that you were there for that kind of first internet game. That's such a crazy. You said maybe you have the video. I would love to see that. That's so crazy to think that you were there for that moment.
Yeah, it was intense. It was definitely something. Because the original Marathon would only work over Apple Talk networks.
Was that like
unless you're playing the Windows version? The Windows version would actually work over the internet, just very slowly.
So the very first game, it didn't release on Windows. Is that correct? There wasn't a Windows version initially, or was there? It was relegated exclusively to Mac.
Marathon and Marathon Infinity were just on Mac. Yes.
Wow. Was that like kind of like a big hurdle in the early days, or was it like pretty easy once everything was kind of being reverse engineers and brought over, or was the Mac like kind of did not speak well bringing it over to other platforms?
Oh, you mean for the Aleph 1 ports?
Yeah.
The there were things that needed to be done in there. The Windows source code for Marathon 2 was never released. So the Aleph 1 is based on the Mac version. And yeah, there were things that had to be done in there because, like, at the time, PowerPC Macs and Intel PCs store basic things like 32-bit integers in a different order in memory. And so all of those have to be reversed when you're loading. Like, if you're loading a map file, the map file is all in Mac format still in this. So it all has to be reversed in memory when you load it. But that was done, early on in the early 2000s there. I think I mentioned Christian Bauer.
Mm-hmm.
He had also been a contributor to like Mac emulators and other stuff like that. And he was a Unix user back then. So he understood a lot of that porting stuff. we're really lucky that we got so many good contributors on the project so early to get it kind of kickstarted into being cross-platform and a little more modern.
Yeah, yeah, and it speaks to just how kind of awesome and committed this whole community has been for so long. Michael in the chat wanted to know on which OS ALF1 originally coded, and what's Treellama's preferred system nowadays.
It was originally the first versions of ALF1 were released for classic Mac OS.
Okay.
So that was right during the OS 9 Mac OS 10 transition. And so eventually a Mac OS 10 version came out, I would say in that first year, but the very first versions were for the classic Mac OS because that's what Marathon 2 was for.
Wow.
Nowadays, my desktop machine is a Linux box.
Okay, that was going to be my guess. I feel like that's the go-to for tech savvy folks.
Yeah, and that's easier for me to develop with because the debugger and the editors and all that stuff are what I'm familiar with. But I also have a Mac laptop and a Windows virtual machine for running games, including hopefully someday the new Marathon.
So I guess speaking about that, are you pretty excited? Do you play a lot of like modern games, or is most of your time kind of spent doing like classic game stuff that you're more familiar with? Or
I don't play a lot of modern games, especially not modern shooters. So I'll probably get destroyed in New Marathon, like unless there's a way to be, unless there's a way to be stealth or something like that.
Yeah.
I do play some newer games when I have the time. I wouldn't consider myself a serious gamer just because, at this stage of life, you have to choose very carefully what you're spending your time on.
Yeah.
But I play like Diablo 4. My wife loves to play Diablo 4, and so that's like a way to spend time with her playing Diablo 4. And this year I played some Marathon mods like Historia and Apotheosis. And I think I played through like BioShock Infinite this year, and I don't know what else is on my Steam for this year. So I don't have it is a great game. Yeah, that's another one of those trilogies that trilogy reminds me a lot of the Marathon trilogy, in fact.
Yeah, a lot of depth there.
Yeah, a lot of depth. So I do play some modern games. I have a decent GPU in this thing, and I'm going to give Marathon a try, but it certainly isn't something I spend as much time on as I did when I was just, constantly playing Diablo 2 or Marathon back in the day.
Oh, Michael wants to know which Linux distribution as well. He's trying to take your setup.
Well, it's Debian 12 is what I'm running right now.
Do you have a favorite scenario, like out of all the kind of, because I feel like that's another thing where it's like I feel like there have been fan scenarios for a very long time, but I'm really only kind of aware of the kind of main big ones. I played through Apotheosis X, and I think Rubicon as well I've touched, but
okay, yeah, I kept getting lost in Rubicon, so I've never managed to beat that one. I did play through Apotheosis. It was tough. For an old gamer. My favorite is probably Tempest Irae.
Okay. I think Joku, I was just talking to him about that.
The 2006 version of Tempest Irae, I helped a little bit to get that released because there was a bit of animosity between that team and the ALF1 team because people were focusing on different features than were needed for this and that, and then it was crashing a lot. And so we patched up a lot of that and got a release of Tempest Irae out in 2006 that has some nicer, higher quality textures. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of my favorite third-party scenarios. I'm not as big on those as I am the original trilogy. Mm-hmm. They do some new stuff, and I will say the most recent ones are much more polished. But back in the day, the fan scenarios couldn't be quite as polished as like the original games were.
How big of a deal was, because like in the manual for the first game, you see, or maybe it's a site, but you see them talking about like Forge mode, and then you had said, because you had worked on, I believe it's called Wieland, right? Is that the kind of map editor
Yeah, Wayland.
Wayland. How
Yeah.
big of a deal kind of was that? Were map editors like such a big thing? Because I hear, obviously my kind of relationship with like a Forge mode would be more tied to like Halo 3, So even the concept that going back that far, it was such a big deal. I know Doom, I guess, had
Oh
like
yeah, in
map editing.
1996, that was huge for Mac users because they could actually make games now. Um, there was Unreal for Mac and there was Quake for Mac, but the editors didn't get ported to the Mac.
Wow.
So having Forge come out in 96 was a big deal if you wanted to make 3D games and you had a Mac. If you had a PC, then you were in good shape. But back then there was that big divide. So,
That's
and
awesome.
Forge is so easy to use. Like it's much easier to use than any of the editors for a more 3D game like Quake or Unreal because there's more you have to worry about in those games. Whereas Forge, you just kind of draw a map and then extend it out into space.
Then you're cooking. Now you're
That's
playing.
right. Yeah, so it's really easy to get into, really easy to design maps. I don't know if you've looked at the CD that came with the Marathon trilogy. It just had, I don't know, hundreds or maybe thousands of maps that people had made and sent in. Bungie just collected them all and put them on a disc, and that's not even all of them. There were other map discs that, like, I think some of the shareware magazines came with them and stuff like that. So there were just tons of net maps and some solo maps and all kinds of stuff for the game.
That's so cool. Yeah, and I've read some things on the Marathon story page about people kind of around when that time was happening being pretty excited that they were kind of included, in some sort of official capacity.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was official. People loved Marathon so much that there were two map editors written by not by Bungie. There were two third-party map editors written for the original Marathon, Forte and Mia, and so that's people like Mac users are really big into Marathon at the time.
Is there anything that, because obviously, kind of like one of the things that sticks out, looking back at such a long history, is all of the interesting little tidbits that you come across that have been preserved on forum pages and like I said, the story page and stuff like that. Is there any kind of moment that like sticks out to you in the history of the Marathon community as just being the most interesting or strange thing to have occurred? Obviously, with the ARG, in 2023, we had the cornfield and stuff like that, and there's obviously little bits like that throughout history.
Cornfield was pretty weird, but it's just a continuation of the quirkiness of the community, right? You always there's like a cycle of people who join and they're like in their teens or something, and they don't, they're like socially awkward and they say weird things and they talk too much, and then over time, like they get integrated with the community and they start to and you can see them just grow as people.
Yeah.
And they're not nearly as annoying once they've had a few years of interacting with people, and it's just kind of like it's at this point I must have seen this cycle 5 or 10 times where it's just you see people get into the game and everybody has their own personality, what they find different things interesting about the game. They have different bizarre theories than my bizarre theories about the game. They have, so it's a really tight-knit community, and it's not, I think, like with a Doom or something like that, you have a bunch of different communities that don't interact with each other as much, and whereas Marathon is just this one.
Yeah, it does seem much more cohesive. Like there's always been a kind of common glue that's kind of kept everybody together. But yeah, with the Doom stuff, there's a lot more.
Yeah, the nicheness of Marathon is kind of what does it. There aren't enough fans to sustain two tribal communities that war against each other. So
it's a necessity.
Right.
Creates unity.
Yeah, there are. I mean, we've had lots of moments in all that time. The forums had an entire section of legendary threads where people would get into flame wars and embarrass themselves, and I'm by no means excluded from that description. And then their threads would end up in legendary threads, and then just just all of the inside jokes going back as far as the time that one person posted an ode to Hamish about him eating people with chips, oh delicious chips. Just, I mean, that was one of the original inside jokes, and they're still going to this day. So if you look at the emojis in the Discord, there are some emojis you'll be like, if you don't know, if you haven't been in the community for a long time, you'll be like, why is this an emoji? Some of them you've only had to be here for like a year or two. Like there's an Iowa emoji in the Discord.
Yeah.
It's just the state of Iowa, right? Just those inside jokes, they delight me. So I don't know that there's one particular moment, but it's just kind of the gestalt of all of those things mixed together that makes me look fondly at the community.
It's awesome. It's awesome to see. Oh, Ander in the chat is asking if it's coming to PS5, but which kind of probably a joking question. But is there a goal? Like, would you guys want to bring it as a package to like modern consoles or something?
That's another inside joke.
Is it? Oh, okay, that's me.
I appreciate it. Yes.
There you
go. Very good. No, I don't know that we can, to answer a joke question seriously. I don't know that we can do that because you have to have licensing and there are restrictions on the PS5 distribution that exclude using free software.
Okay.
So that one's kind of out of the question. Even iOS is pushing it a little bit. By my interpretation, I don't think you can actually put a GPL piece of software on iOS. But I was willing to make an exception for my contributions to the game on the just as long as it was made like free of charge. So that is on iOS, and nobody else has complained about it. So we get away with it there. But I think to try to put it on PS5 would be a whole other
can of worms there.
A whole other disaster of kind of licensing and stuff like that. And I honestly, I don't even know how Bungie would feel about that. So
if obviously kind of being consistently on this one project for such a long period of time, how do you feel like, because obviously with the announcement of the new game, you see a lot of people saying like, oh, we just want the original series again, we want like a campaign, or they want like a remake. Do you think that like that's something that down the road would be welcome, just like remaking kind of a la Demon Souls or what they've done with the slightly older games, kind of polishing them and bring something like that? Or do you think it's best left kind of in the state that it is, given that so much quality of life and preservation has been done to make it accessible to people and kind of have the full experience as it was intended to be played?
No, I think it would be good. Particularly the first game, you could polish up and fix up a lot of quirks of the first game and make a more playable, more compatible to modern audiences version of that. And it's not going to, we'll always have, as long as we're able to distribute the original one, it's not going to take away from that, right?
Yeah.
If we lose players to that game, then it doesn't matter that much. It's probably people who weren't going to be able to get through the original one anyway with all of its 1990s FPS quirks,
Yeah.
So yeah, I would be excited to see that. It doesn't seem like they're going that way with the new marathon. So, but maybe if it's successful, I don't know. We'll see.
See something else. I guess I'm going to let you go here in a few minutes, but I do have to ask: is there an open kind of origin, or is it a secret to the Treellama name? Did you see a tree or a llama in a tree, or is this top secret?
So no, it's not top secret at all. I don't know if you've ever heard about Treellamas or something that they tell campers about.
Okay, it's like the snipes, maybe would be
really,
what I've heard.
Really, yes, really vicious things. And so one year we were trying to convince I think it may have been my then girlfriend, future wife, about how real these things are. And so I made a webpage, which were rare at the time, made a webpage explaining what Treellamas are and, how to stay away from them and how to stay safe and all that stuff. And I actually registered the domain treellama.org. It had to be a .org because you weren't allowed at the time to host a commercial website, a .com, from the campus internet. So it had to be a .org. And so that's the origins of Treellama.org. And I used to play under a different name on Net Games, but people just recognized the Treellama more, so that ended up being the nickname that I used.
So the origin is a troll. You were trolling, so that's good.
Yes. Well, yes.
Yeah, that's a great prank. That's fantastic.
I mean, that's you have to do that thing with your significant other, right? If you don't troll them once in a while, then what good are you?
Exactly.
Don't worry, she gives it back just as much. So
that's awesome. I guess when is Cooked Bread said when is ALF 2 coming out? So which maybe 30 years from now. You think you got another 30 years of development in you for ALF 2?
I don't know. It's been bursty. Like when my kids were born, I took many years. I didn't contribute very much to the engine at all, just except to offer constructive criticism to the developers who were working on it at the time. Let's put it that way. And I don't know like what the future holds for that. But as far as version numbers go, there are some things we want to do to the map format to add some features and to make it a little more flexible that will age the map format a little bit. And so we're thinking of maybe calling that one a 2.0 release when we do that. But it won't be officially called Aleph 2.
Yeah. Aleph 1,
I'll leave
2.
that. Yeah, it'll be Aleph 1 2.0. Yeah, so I'll leave the Aleph 2 name for anybody else who wants to claim it and try to cause confusion by using the same name.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I hope I'm around to see that. And I think before I let you go, my last question would be: where do you think Marathon is 30 years from now? What do you think kind of is the next 30 years like for Marathon, if you had to guess?
I don't know. I mean, I know the classics, the classic trilogy, that's going to be here in 30 years because you can download it and start it up and you don't need a net connection. And the new Marathon, that one I don't know about. And so that's one of those things where like we've got this new form of game that is a more ethereal experience, right? You can play it at the time and you can experience it and it goes for seasons and then it's gone and it's really gone. It's kind of like performance art.
That's a really good point.
I mean, my hope is that it, I mean, it'll still have YouTube's made about it and it'll have people telling stories about the time they got this really cool kill or this time they snuck up on this guy and like snuck around him and he didn't even see them or things like that. Those experiences will still live even after the new game servers are shut off, because I don't think they'll be running in 30 years. I'll say that.
Yeah. That'd be the longest live service, I guess, of all time.
It would be the longest live service. That would be cool if they did it, but I kind of doubt that they're going to do that. So, but that's kind of where I see it. We'll have classic. We'll have lots of memories of new Marathon, and maybe there will be a new Marathon. We'll see. And
I guess the lore videos for that game will be like 20 hours long to figure everything out.
Yeah.
To go even deeper.
I'll be in an old folks home by that point if I'm still alive. So I'll be just, I'll be playing with our VR headsets or something, and I'll just be sitting with my old CRT monitor and an old keyboard and mouse playing the original one.
Got the net games going. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to check in on your stream, and I'll try to catch up with some net games tomorrow. So
awesome.
Here's hoping your 30 hours goes smoothly.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I speak for everybody in the community. We're grateful for all the work you've put in and everyone else behind it. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, you have a good night. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good one. Bye-bye.